My name is Malachi Boyuls. I'm running for railroad commissioner. And I'm running for a railroad commissioner for a couple reasons. First, and probably most importantly, the oil and gas industry right now is really driving a lot of what we're doing in this state economically. And I think it's primed to even do greater things for the state. And I think it's even set up well to really do a lot of great things for this country. We heard recently that the trade deficit is lower. We're getting on the verge of energy independence in this country, and a lot of that's driven by what's going on in Texas. Now, we're set up to do well going forward, but it's not inevitable. We need somebody on the Railroad Commission who has experience in the industry and who has experience fighting back the federal government. I'm a small business owner in the oil and gas industry, and before then was a regulatory attorney. So my job was to stand up to the federal government and actually fight the EPA, stand toe-to-toe with the EPA, and really push back on their infringements in the private sector and keep them from killing more Texas jobs. So it's important going forward for the future of Texas to have somebody on the Railroad Commission who can do that. And second, I'm running because we are at a point in this state where we need a new generation of leaders who are committed to doing what's right, doing what's in the best interest of Texas, and who aren't interested as much in self-preservation and self-advancement. So to reach the hearts and minds of generations and rising demographics, we need a new generation of leaders who can appeal to those guys and women.
I'm sure you get asked this question a lot. Since the Railroad Commission no longer oversees railroads,
right, should
the commission change its name, and what do you think it should change its name to?
You're right. The commission it's a frequent question I get, nothing to do with railroads or trains anymore. It regulates the oil and gas industry and coal and uranium production. My thought on the name change is, it's a tough question. I think on one side there are a lot of people who like the name because of the nostalgia of the Railroad Commission. It's the oldest agency in Texas, and it's always been the Railroad Commission. Going forward, though, changing the name is something I'm open to. It's not, I don't have a strong position one way or the other. The reality is, if we do end up changing the name, it's going to cost several $1 million to do so. And I believe it requires a constitutional amendment because in the Constitution it is called the Railroad Commission. So in the interest of the taxpayers, I'm not sure that's the top of the list.
In what areas do you feel the Railroad Commission needs the most improvement?
I think primarily efficiency. The oil and gas industry is booming in Texas right now, and there are backlogs in certain permits and reports. And the last thing we need in Texas for Texans is for a government agency to really slow down the progression of an industry that's providing this state tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs, billions of dollars in tax revenue, billions of dollars of investment in this state. So we don't need an agency to really slow down and hamper the growth of that industry. So if we could increase the efficiencies within the agency, I think would be better for Texas.
On the efficiency issue, we get a lot of complaints from people saying that the Railroad Commission's website is outdated,
right,
the technology is outdated, and in August the Railroad Commission gave a company called CGI a $14 million contract to modernize the Commission's technology. CGI is also the biggest contractor for healthcare.gov.
That's right.
It was unanimously supported by the current commissioners. Do you support Texas using this company after what happened with the federal health website?
Well, from the contractual standpoint, I'm not sure what the recourse is, whether we can get out of that or whether that's something we're bound to. I do support ensuring that throughout the stages of this rollout within, with the website, with the improved database, and then improved kind of technological infrastructure, that we stay on top of them and ensure that they're providing the services they're going to provide in a way that adds value to the industry, but also adds value to Texans who are interested in finding out more about injection wells that are near them or wells that are being drilled near them. So I think we've got to ensure that we stay on top of them to make sure they're doing the job they said they were going to do, and to make sure they do it within the budget that the Railroad Commission has approved.
So no premature launch?
No premature launch, that's right.
One of the things that's come up in the news recently is seismic activities, where fracking or hydraulic fracturing is occurring, and the Railroad Commission's looking into hiring a seismologist. Do you think these concerns over these seismic activities are legitimate, and how do we pursue this issue?
Yeah, well, I think anytime, look, the Railroad Commission and the commissioners themselves are elected to serve Texas and to do what's in the best interest of Texans. And so anytime Texans have a concern with what's going on in an industry, I think it's the Railroad Commission's job to look into that and to do whatever it can to do whatever is in the best interest of Texans. So yes, I think the Railroad Commission should look into it. But I do think it's important that the Railroad Commission not act prematurely. You mentioned fracking as a potential cause of some of the seismic activity, and I'm not sure that's the case. I think probably more likely it has something to do with the injection or disposal wells, but we have, I think, over 50,000 injection and disposal wells in Texas, all over the state. 35,000 of them are active right now, and this seismic activity is limited to a pretty small area in North Texas near me. So I do think we need to look into it, but I do think it's important that we don't just try to find a solution, or that we come up with a solution in search of a problem. We need to figure out what the problem is and base a solution on science and fact.
With Texas facing water shortages every year,
yeah,
there are some concerns with the practice of fracking using a lot of fresh water. New technologies are being developed, like brackish water, natural gas, as an alternative to fresh water. What can you do as a railroad commissioner? What can you do to ensure that these technologies are improved and implemented?
Yeah, well, look, bringing up brackish water is a great point. I read recently that we have 880 trillion barrels, or gallons, I believe, of brackish water in the state. So we have and interestingly, a lot of that brackish water we find in areas where we have a drought, where we have limited reserves of fresh water. So we've got to find ways to use that water. And in West Texas, they're already using brackish water. In South Texas, they're using some brackish water. And East Texas, they're probably using less. As a railroad commissioner and on the Railroad Commission, we've got to do whatever we can to incentivize the responsible use of water, whether it's trying to find more ways to use brackish water, whether it's trying to find ways to use less fresh water, recycling, using natural gas or some of the liquid gas to frack. But I think all options have got to be on the table. Water is a very important issue in this state, and it's going to remain one for decades to come.
The Texas Landowners Bill of Rights states your property can only be taken for public use or a public use.
Right.
Yet private common carrier pipeline companies have the statutory right to eminent domain. Do you agree with this practice, and what can the commission do to protect private property rights?
Well, that's a big issue. It's within the kind of the statutory scheme. The legislature has offered 7 ways in which a pipeline can be considered a common carrier, and it's generally for public use. I personally, whether I agree with the process or not, my preference is for the pipelines and the landowners to come to an agreement and never have to use eminent domain. I think that's just a free market principle that we should encourage. What the Railroad Commission can do to help protect landowners. Right now there's a form at the Railroad Commission called T4 form, and so pipeline companies go in and they self-declare as common carriers, and then they use this form when they go to the landowners and condemn land. I think that process has got to be beefed up. If there are 7 ways in which a pipeline can be considered a common carrier, I think it may be a good idea for them to declare under which they fall, and then provide a modicum or a prima facie showing of proof as to why they fall under that certain designation of a common carrier. This big Denbury case with the Supreme Court lays out the certain requirements that a pipeline company must meet in order to be considered a common carrier. So I think the Railroad Commission has got to adjust its practices accordingly for the protection of private property rights.
So, one thing I hear is that all you have to do is fill out a 2-page piece of paper to be declared a common carrier. Is that really true? Do you think that process needs to be improved or made more difficult?
Well, I think look, we've always got to find ways to improve processes, right? To increase efficiencies. We've got to balance the interests of getting the resources from the ground to the refinery so we can actually get to energy independence in this country. I think that's a very important issue that the Railroad Commission can play a large role in. But second, I think we've got to balance that with the protection of property rights. In Texas, property rights are a big deal. I mean, I think in the United States they're a big deal, but in Texas specifically. So we've got to make sure we balance those issues, and we've got to look for ways to improve our processes. If a pipeline company or if a company generally can just go in and tell the agency that's regulating them, hey, I'm a common carrier, I'm this or I'm that, without any sort of proof or check, I think, you know, we've got to make sure that the process is such that we're protecting private property rights.
If the Keystone Pipeline is ever approved, what can Texas do to make sure that it's as safe as possible? Yeah,
well, I think, you know, it's going to take, it kind of goes back to the efficiency part of the Railroad Commission that we talked about earlier. We've got to make sure that we've got the technology available to the people in the field who can go and inspect the pipeline to make sure that it's functioning properly, that it's continues to be safe and reliable in the interest of Texas and Texans. I think so. The technology component within the Railroad Commission, I think, is going to be important, but making sure that we have within the Railroad Commission an adequate staff. So we're not just checking a mile of pipeline once a year. So we're continually monitoring the safety and well-being of the pipeline, or the safety of the pipeline for the well-being of Texans.
Are you concerned about the use of substandard materials for the pipeline, such as Chinese steel, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we've all got to be concerned with. You know, if we're going to build anything in Texas, we want to make sure that we do it in a way that's the safest way possible for Texas. And so, yeah, I think that's got to be a concern for anything we build in Texas.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.
How can people find out more about your campaign?
Well, thanks so much. Look, this has been a great opportunity. You can visit my website at malachifortexas.com. It's MALACHI and the word FOR, Texas.com. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.